As many of you know, I'm a huge fan of the Gameboy Macro mod, taking a damaged DS and giving it new life as a sleek, dedicated Game Boy Advance console. This mod is fairly simple, requiring the removal of the top screen and soldering in a tiny resistor. However, the Macro mod had one major shortfall: the speaker. After completing the mod, the audio was noticeably quieter and you lost stereo sound. But it's 2021 and we now have a solution. Let's take a closer look. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today we're going to revisit the Gameboy Macro mod, except this time we'll be using this. This is the Macro Flex Amp from Helder. Traditionally, this mod is performed by soldering a small 330 ohm resistor onto the DS motherboard, allowing the unit to boot up without the top screen. This was a fantastic mod you could do to a broken DS, and it gave amazing results, but the audio wasn't the greatest. After installing the single mono speaker, the volume was significantly diminished. Helder's mod will add an audio amp which will boost the volume significantly and make the Macro mod all the more viable as an alternative to a standard Game Boy Advance. Now, one of the other issues with the Macro mod is that you lost stereo sound. When performing the mod, you had to choose whether you would tap into the right or left audio channel. Well, another great thing about Helder's mod is that it mixes both the left and right audio channel and combines them for use with a single speaker. So there's no lost audio, which is absolutely fantastic. And the icing on the cake is that the Flex Amp also further filters the audio. While the DS audio is already great, this just cleans it up a little bit more. And of course, this incorporates the needed resistor to actually do the Gameboy Macro mod itself, all encapsulated into this single package. So as you can see, this little flex board has quite a bit of features. This is an all-in-one solution for completing the Gameboy Macro mod. So to start things off, I'll briefly go over everything I'll be using for this project. Then I'll show you how to put it all together, discuss the key features of this mod, go over the pros and cons, and I'll end things by providing you with my overall thoughts. So I'll actually be installing this into my already modded Gameboy Macro, but don't worry, I'll still go over the full mod from beginning to end in the tutorial. So if you're starting this mod from scratch, you'll need the following things. The first of which is a Nintendo DS, preferably one that has a broken hinge or has a damaged top screen. You'll of course need a speaker as well. The Nintendo Switch speakers tend to work best for this mod due to its small size and thin form factor. While not needed, I highly recommend the Boxy Pixel Macro faceplate. This makes the mod extremely refined looking and a whole lot easier to complete as well. You can also opt to get the glass screen lens. This is completely optional, but again, it makes the overall finish of the mod very refined. And of course, you'll want to get the Helder Macro Flex Amp. This thing packs a ton of features and also makes this mod incredibly easy. Now, this is actually a prototype flex board. The final production one will have an extra solder point that will turn the amp off when the console is off. You don't need to worry, as it will be an extremely similar installation process that I'll be going over in the tutorial. Okay, I think I covered just about everything, so without any further ado, let's start this project. Okay, let's take this DS Lite apart. To get started, unfasten all the rear screws and remove the battery. Don't forget to remove the Game Boy Advance cartridge cover, as well as the two screws underneath the two rubber pads. With the rear cover removed, you can take out the L&R triggers. Be careful not to lose the springs. Next, disconnect the two antennas from the motherboard as well as the Wi-Fi module. It's stuck on there with some adhesive, so it may be a little bit stubborn. Now remove the single screw securing the motherboard, which will allow you to remove it. Be careful, as there is still one more ribbon cable we need to disconnect. Once removed, carefully fish the antenna wire from underneath the DS cartridge reader, which will allow you to completely separate the DS motherboard. With the motherboard isolated, use your flush cutters to remove the ribbon cable connector. This will create more space for the speaker we'll be installing later on. And this is what it should look like. Next, we'll remove the LCD by disconnecting the digitizer ribbon cable as shown. Then disconnect the LCD ribbon cable, which will free the LCD assembly. Now, if you want to install the custom macro glass screen lens, you need to remove the digitizer from the LCD. I used a craft knife to carefully separate it from the LCD as shown. With the digitizer off, we can now move our attention to installing the Helder Flex PCB. After aligning all the pads with the Flex PCB, I tacked it in place. Once it's tacked in and positioned, go ahead and solder the following points as shown. When soldering the two power connections, make sure there is no bridging. And this is what it should look like. Now, please note that this is a pre-production unit. The actual production Flex PCB will have one more connection point to test pad P04 shown here. It'll be just as easy to solder as all of the other connections. Soldering to this pad is needed to shut off the amp when the console is turned off. Great, now pre-tin the two speaker pads. Solder the red wire to the pad labeled SP positive and the black wire to SP negative. And this is how everything should look. Now go ahead and use some Kapton tape to cover the exposed connector pads shown here, as well as the Flex amp module. Now you can go ahead and reinstall the LCD. Here you can see that the glass screen lens is already installed. This is actually supposed to be installed once the macro is fully assembled, but do remember this is an already modded macro, which is why you see it installed here. Now go ahead and install all your buttons and membranes into the BoxyPixel macro faceplate. And disregard the pink plastic tabs on top, as they are not required with BoxyPixel's new macro shells. This shell that I have here is one of the legacy macro faceplates. Now carefully drop in the LCD and motherboard, also making sure the speaker is properly positioned. Then fasten the two screws securing the motherboard. Make sure the speaker wires are out of the way, and then install the L and R triggers. Next, reinstall the Wi-Fi module. Your DS Lite will not turn on without this. Drop the rear shell in place, making sure the sliders are operating properly, and then button up the console. Pop in a game and give it a quick test. Fantastic. I have to say, the Gameboy Macro mod has been perfected to the point that it is one of the best Game Boy Advance form factors in my opinion. The biggest downfall of this mod was the audio, and that has been totally addressed with Helder's Flex amp. It's truly outstanding. And like I've said in the past, I really think the Macro just looks so sleek. It shares a lot of the design aesthetics of the old Game & Watch devices from Nintendo. Okay, let's quickly go over all of the features of this mod. To start, most obvious is the louder audio. It is significantly louder than the original Macro mod. To show you the difference, here's a side-by-side comparison of two Game Boy Macros. one with Helder's Flex Amp and the other without. Wow, so that's a pretty significant difference, and really just a game changer for the Gameboy Macro mod. So, now let's go over the pros and cons. I won't be going over the pros and cons of the Macro mod, rather I'll just be focused on Helder's Flex PCB. If you want to see more details about the Macro mod itself, be sure to check out my other video, which I'll have linked down below. So starting with the pros, first and foremost is the louder audio. As I said before, this was one of the biggest pitfalls of the Macro mod. The significantly louder audio completely resolves that issue. Not only that, we now get stereo mixing, which again was something that was missing before. Prior to this mod, one would have to choose either the left or right audio channel as the audio source. While Helder could have simply just amplified one channel of audio, he decided to go the extra step and incorporate audio mixing. It's a small benefit, but I think it's great that it was implemented. And the last pro that I could think of is ease of installation. These Flex PCB mods are just so awesome, and I'm really glad that they're gaining traction in the modding community. Before, you had to solder a really tiny resistor onto the motherboard. It required a delicate touch and can be difficult to accomplish if you don't have experience soldering. The Flex PCB solves that issue completely by incorporating the needed resistor into the design. The beauty of the Flex PCB is that there is no need for wires. Everything is pre-laid out and lines up with all the necessary solder points. Oh, and I think they look really cool. I understand you may not be able to look at the mod since the shell covers it up, but knowing that it's a nice and tidy package and not a rat's nest of wires somehow makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Okay, now let's get into the cons. And honestly, I couldn't think of any. This is a really great kit if you're thinking about doing the Gameboy Macro mod. If this was available when I was doing my previous Macro mods about a year ago, I would have definitely used it. Now, if one had to nitpick, I guess one could say that cost could be an issue if you compare it to the alternative of using a simple 330 ohm resistor, which only costs a few cents. But really, that's kind of a stretch because you're getting so many more features with the Helder kit. So all in all, I have to say that this is 100% the best way to do the Gameboy Macro mod. So there you have it. The newly refreshed Gameboy Macro mod using Helder's Flex Amp PCB. An incredible alternative to the original Game Boy Advance, SP, Micro, and perhaps even the unhinged SP. As always, I'm curious about what you all think of this build. Will any of you be doing the Gameboy Macro mod using Helder's fantastic kit? Definitely let me know by leaving a comment with your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Macho Nacho Productions. I release content every Thursday, so be sure to turn on notifications. And as always, see you next time.